Hello everyone. Welcome to the fifth week of the course on modern applications development. We have come a long way since we began. We have the basic web application infrastructure ready with us. We started from a spreadsheet. We went on to the command line. We gradually modified the command line so that it produced HTML output. Finally, we also added the ability to accept input using HTML, using the forms interface. In this week, we will look at this view in a little more detail and understand the HTML and CSS operationally. Professor Sane has discussed the conceptual aspects behind this idea. We will quickly review those ideas and go ahead with trying to understand the workings of actual HTML and CSS. In his sessions, Professor Sane has shown you this picture where he contrasted the architecture of a graphical interface and the architecture of a web system. The view and model separating these two aspects of a program has been an architectural innovation in some sense. In a graphical system, a part of the code is dedicated to the views and the other part is dedicated to the model, with handlers that communicate between them. Very similarly, in a web system, you have the HTTP protocol as the glue that binds the view aspect that is the responsibility of the browser, and the model or any computation that is the responsibility of the server. We saw that in action when the form interface of our FairShare app accepted a sequence of commands that otherwise were actually done on the standard input of your terminal. Your roommates typed in a sequence of commands and finally pressed submit. This formed the request aspect of the HTTP protocol from the browser to the server. The browser collected the data that was there in the form, packaged it as a request, and sent it over to the server. The server, on receiving that packet, ran a program that read the information that was sent by the browser, performed whatever computations were necessary. In our case, it was the FairShare application that actually responded to the commands. So when register command was received, our FairShare application performed the registration of the roommates. If expense command was received, then the expenses were recorded. If the report was to be generated, it was done so. And finally, when it all ended, our FairShare application generated the HTML page that contained all this information as an HTML page. It was this HTML page that was sent by the server back to the browser, back to the requesting browser. This is how the HTTP system realizes the model view aspect of the system, of the idea that Professor Sane mentioned. Let us begin our journey of trying to understand HTML. Let's start from what the user really seeks in the information. On the right of your screen, you see the output of a FairShare system in a plain HTML form, or the results of rendering a simple HTML page. Let's keep the HTML aside for a moment. From the user's perspective, what really is the information that is really relevant to a user? a title that gives a brief overview of what really is the following information about. We might think of a registration section that gives us details of the registration of the roommates. In other words, which set of roommates does our current system know about? We would want to have a transcript, a record of the expenses that were done. These are pure expenses in the sense that for every event, the amount that was paid by which roommate, those statements, it is just a list of those statements. And finally, we would really want to have a report part where the report commands for whichever roommate that we needed were given. And in response to the report command, our fair share system gave information about any paybacks that were required. It's possible that we might add some additional information. We might seek the actual database of the information that was contained in the transactions of the roommates. We could give some simple information like the number of roommates, the number of events, and so on and so forth. We could also list out the actual entire database of computations that were performed by our system. Let me reiterate the point. We are looking at the kind of information a user might really want. We are not yet dealing with the question how to represent this information using HTML. We are asking what is it that the user would want as an information. A registration section with registration information, an expenses section with a record of the expenses that were done, and the reports section which contained the reports for whichever friends the reports were requested for. We might possibly need more information optionally in terms of general information like the number of roommates or a detailed database of all the calculations performed. Let us now go ahead and see how this required information by the user, which we will call as user content, how do we actually use HTML to display this user information. As usual, this would be a good point to take a little bit of a pause and recall what we have done. Review what we have just said. As we said before, on your screen you see the bare form of information that was generated by the fair share application. Let us now mark parts of the applications conceptually in various ways. We seek, for example, a title with a short description. There would be section headings to separate out individual pieces of information. The pieces of information themselves could be lists of various items. They could also be tables of information. So we are now clear of what we seek to as information that we want our users to see. We also see what are the logical components of that organization. We require a title, we require headings, we require ability to list out some pieces of information, we require the ability to tabulate information, and so on and so forth. It is exactly this aspect of the information that is marked by using the HTML system, Hypertext Markup Language. We now see the same information that was presented simply as text. We now see a HTML version of it. Although it's a very small font and almost invisible, it's actually a complete HTML page. We will now zoom in on parts of this page and study how that HTML markup system has been used to organize the user content. Let me repeat, we are going to reorganize the user content using HTML. Here is the initial part of the HTML system that you just saw. The arrows show you which part of the HTML corresponds to what we as users are seeking and organizing. As users, we seek a title, and as organizers of the information, we want a part of the document to be explicitly marked as title and a heading. We see the title tags, the one in red, and we see the heading of level 1, H1, in the current system as displayed right now. Heading level 2, roommate registrations as a heading, expenses record as a heading, report as a heading, and the database as a heading of level 2 is used to separate out logical pieces of information. In the registrations part, we are going to list out the friends who form the roommates here. In the expenses section, we are going to list out the set of expenses that this group of roommates have carried out, and so on and so forth. What we are showing here is how a simple text system is simply marking what part of the text is to be representing what part of the information that we want to organize. There is no statement about how the information is to be presented. For example, when we see a heading level 2 as roommate registrations over here, this is simply typed in as text by us. When this is displayed by the browser, it is displayed like this. We now see how lists of information are created and presented. As creators, we only create a list of information. Here is a tag, HTML tag, that is used to present ordered lists. By ordered, we mean that they are enumerated 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. An ordered list is tagged between OL and /OL. The members of the list are tagged between list item LI and /LI to denote the end of the current list item. In this case, it's F1. The next list item is F2, which is again enclosed in the tags LI list item and /LI. In expenses record, we again have an ordered list OL and /OL with list items F2 200 between LI and /LI. This is how we write ordered list in HTML. When we mark up, we are simply writing text documents with a very standardized system that marks the text for whatever the eventual purpose of organization is. We wish to organize this as a list item for expenses section. Therefore, here is the organization of the list, and it is coming under the heading H2 for expenses. Here is the later part of the same web page, HTML piece of code. Again, you see the database as the second level heading, and we now see tables. Just like lists, we now have tables which will create a table of information and values, or information and records of values. It is possible to write this page by hand. In other words, you could simply open up your editor and start writing the page as we just saw. We start with this doc HTML. HTML head, body, H1, H2, P for paragraphs, ordered list, list items, and so on and so forth. We can just go on typing. The actual information is here between the tags. Our tags in this slide are colored to distinguish them from the information that we type. Let us for a moment see and understand this organization of HTML. The HTML that we just saw, which created this part of the presentation of information of the user content, we can see that we can conceptually imagine that as a tree structure. We are showing the tree structure here for the table part of the system. This is a sample part of the HTML page. A table is made up of some rows, one or more rows. Each row is made up of some data. This data, what exactly is the data, is represented by an ellipse. This is one column, this is another column. In the next row, this is one column. Here is the actual information that gets displayed. Here is the next column. Here is the information that gets displayed. In the second table, that actually was a database, we required one row that represented the headers of the table, and that row had the first data item as the event number, second data item as the information for friend F1, roommate F1. The third data item was information for roommate F2. There is a typo here. This should be F2. And so on and so forth. This structure of the HTML document is called as a document object model, or the DOM. And the tree that results is called as a DOM tree. This conceptual view of an HTML page is extremely useful. In fact, it corresponds to a very object-oriented model of a web page. This object-oriented model of a web page is extremely useful, will be extremely useful for us in the future. A few sessions later, we will actually use this particular document object model idea much more usefully. However, at this point, it is also not as bad. It's required for us to understand how HTML is going to be represented, and its display will be done by the browser. Here is a quick overview of the HTML page system. we are going to be compliant with HTML version 5. It starts with a doc type HTML as a declaration. An entire HTML page is enclosed between HTML and /HTML. An entire page is enclosed between this. One specifies the language of the page. This is a short for English. We are going to present this page in English. If you were to present it in Japanese, you would use the corresponding short. An HTML page has subparts, the head, which has the title. There could be other things that are also included in the head. In fact, those other things that are included in the head are very, very useful for search engines. Apart from the head, the HTML also has a body, which is enclosed between the tags body and /body. Among the many things that are there are headings at various levels, H1 that we just saw, ordered lists, list items, and so on and so forth. Whatever you need to put, there is whatever information you need to display, there is a way of hierarchically presenting it. We also have some links shown over here which you can use for a more detailed study or as a reference for the various HTML tags and their uses. In fact, the most authoritative version would be in the W3 pages. This is an organization that defines the standards for the web of various kinds, including HTML, CSS, and so on and so forth. There are a number of online tutorials also available. One of them that is the one that we have mentioned over here, which you can use to know which are the other tags and how to use them. If one looks at it, they are fairly logical. H1 represents heading level 1. There are 6 such heading levels available in HTML that are defined. You have the abilities to present ordered lists using OL. If the lists are unordered, then they are represented using a tag UL for unordered lists. Whether it is an ordered or an unordered, a list will always have a list item. All such kinds of detailed information can be obtained here from the original HTML specification site, or more incrementally using various online tutorials like the W3 schools. There are many others that are also available. Before we leave, let us have a look at a web page. Here is a web page that is generated by one of our fair share programs. Let me take you step by step through this entire page. The first line over here is a comment. Comments in HTML are enclosed between this mark and this ending mark. Whatever is there between this, for example, this part is comment and is ignored by the browser. A web page starts with this declaration of the type of the document, doc type. As I said, HTML pages are enclosed between 2 tags, HTML, and if I go at the end of the page, we will have a /HTML. The closing tag, for every HTML there is a /HTML closing tag. Here is the head, which has a title. The title is the fair share system full stop and is enclosed between the title and the /title. After the title, we have the body of the page. The body of the page is composed of a heading at level 1. Then there is general description, a short one. What is this about? This tag BR is a line break. It is this BR tag that is used by the browser to go to the next line. This means that in your HTML page, you can split the line anywhere you want for your own convenience. And the browser is not going to use that line break that you have given. Instead, it will only use this one. So feel free to organize your web page, write the information of your web page in any way that is convenient to you. Again, this is a comment. Note that the comment is used to just mark the start of the header and end of the header. And this is something that is useful to us human beings who are going to write web pages. Here is a comment that indicates that the HTML registration section part of the web page is starting. It starts with the roommate registrations as the header at level 2. Therefore, it is H2. And the header is as usual enclosed between two tags, H2 and /H2. Two markers, I should say. A P tag starts a paragraph, which of course will involve a new line as displayed on the web browser. Notice that I start the ordered list on the same line as this part of this information that I have written. Recall that the browser is not going to worry about the line breaks that we introduce. Whenever an ordered list is to be started, it is always to be displayed on the next line with a proper enumeration 1, 2, 3, 4 or A, B, C, D, whatever it may be. Here are the list items. In this particular page, unlike the one that we saw in the slides, I have 4 roommates. As of now, no expenses have been recorded and no report has been requested. Therefore, the expenses section marked by header at level 2, there is a statement that no expenses have been recorded and a line break has been introduced in the HTML displayed version. The HR tag creates a horizontal line, the so-called horizontal rule on the web page. What you see is the registration section ends with a line and then the expenses section begins. It means as far as the user is concerned, the user will see a registration section, a line and a expenses section. It will be more neat than what we had presented, the bland, the very simple information that we had presented on our slides. This will be a little bit better. Again, the report section enclosed using the H2 heading level 2 tag. A line break here. Then on the new line, a horizontal line. And the next section, database information that has the table. We will ignore this class for a moment and we will take care of that when we work with CSS, that is cascading style sheets. As we saw in the document object model side, a table is defined by a table row. That table row has some data. The first column of table data contains the information file name. Once that first column is finished using the /td tag, the next column begins. The next column of table data begins. That has this piece of information, and the column ends with a /td. But there are only two columns, so therefore the first row is now over, and you go to the second row, next row. The next row has one column with this information and the second column. And so on and so forth. The second row finishes, the third row begins, the third row finishes, and so on and so forth. The table ends with a /table, and then we write a horizontal rule to separate it from the next table. The next table is marked with a heading at level 3. It says that right now the only thing that has been done is registrations, therefore it's a fresh start, and there is no other information in the database. We have organized the user's information that the user seeks, the content, thought about how that organization is to be marked, and used HTML to actually mark it. It will be good to try out some web pages for yourself and see how they appear on your browser. This is a good point to pause the video and review the material covered so far. Having marked our information that we want to present to the user, let's now look at the next part of the story, how to actually define the presentation. To start with, let us have a look at this conceptual picture of how an HTML page is rendered on by the browser. This picture is taken from the Mozilla developers pages which describe how CSS works. This picture is from the point of view of a browser. A browser loads the HTML. By load, I mean the server. It has connected to the server, and whatever the server has sent as an HTML page, that page is loaded by the browser in its memory. It is parsed in the sense you can imagine that it constructs a document tree of that particular page that it has received. It creates a document tree and it displays over here. This black box is your screen. The HTML that we saw was a very unadorned, simple HTML. It only indicated what part of the information is to be marked. We had designed that information layout. We thought about what is the information that the user seeks. Having recognized that information, we designed it like there would be a registration section, there would be an expenses section, there would be a report section, there would be an optional databases information. Having organized in our minds the layout of the information, we then used HTML to mark that layout. In order to perform presentation, to actually present that marked information, we can additionally take the support of the CSS, cascading style sheets. Just like the HTML is loaded, our browsers will also load the CSS and parse it. The information in the CSS, the style sheets, will then be used to attach the various pieces of style to the objects in the DOM tree, and then they will be displayed. So the HTML will be used to mark, the CSS will be used to define the details of the presentation, and the display is where both of these will now come together, and you will see a much better web page than the simple plain one that we had created. Let's try to understand this process of actually performing the presentation. What do we really do when we want to present? At this point, we are not going to concern ourselves with the markup system that is there. Our only concern is really with whatever information comes from the markup, how do we present it? There are two basic specifications that we really need to worry about. Given a document, we would like to present regions of the document in separate ways. For example, we would want to treat all the HTML that is a part of the registration section, we would want to treat them separately. For example, we might want them to have a different background color. We might want to actually separate sections of the information and display them in different ways. This sectioning is related to the entire document. We would want to group a bunch of HTML tags together. That's what we would like to treat them as. We would like to divide the document into various parts. The other specification that we need to worry about is for individual HTML tags. We would want, for example, the tables to be presented differently. After all, they present different kinds of information. One table is just presenting the values of some pieces of information. The other one is presenting the results of computation. We might want to present these two tables differently. The markup only gives the logical content of the table. It only says that in row 1, column 1, this is the information, row 2, column 2, that is the information, row 3, column 1, whatever else is the information, and so on and so forth. It does not specify how the information is to be presented or how the table rows and the table columns are to be presented. Perhaps we might want to have a different background color for the first column and a different font for the second column. So in general, there would be two kinds of specifications that we need to really worry about. One is the markup layout. Given an HTML markup tag, how is it to be presented? We might want to worry about attributes of presentation like the font family, the colors of the text, the sizes of the font, and many such attributes of presenting that given markup. We have already seen various markups. HTML / HTML is one markup. Body / body is another markup. Ordered list / ordered list is another pair of markups. The general format of defining the presentation or specifying how a particular markup is to appear is as follows. You write the markup selector, for example H1, H2, ordered list, OL, whatever, and separated by a colon, and then within the braces for that markup whatever attributes you want to present and the value. This list is all that you really write. So for example, one might write as H1 colon brace, font family, whatever font you want, font size, whatever font you want, and so on and so forth, and close it. This is an instruction to the browser that in the incoming HTML, wherever you find H1, it is to be displayed using the font that is given here, at the size that is given here, and so on and so forth. This takes care of the individual markups. We will shortly see an example of CSS. But before that, let's look at the other kind of a part where we are concerned with dividing the document into various parts according to their logical organization of the information, and that is something that we know, not the machine. We would like to divide the group of HTML tags into various subgroups. This division is specified by the div tag of HTML. The div tag of HTML does not really mark text. It instead actually divides regions of the HTML into various logical parts that we as designers create. You could divide the HTML into groups called classes, or you could specify regions over which the given specification spans. There are ways of organizing an HTML page, and we have just looked at using div and organizing the we have just shown how to organize HTML into groups using classes of the div tag. The CSS, the specification format then is just like we had a markup selector, we have a class selector, and again attribute and values. This is the most basic way in which presentation is controlled or presentation is defined. As usual, you also have a link over here which you can use to see how CSS works. Here is an example. This example actually just illustrates how markup tags are to be presented. The HTML tag, there is a colon here that is missing in this example. In fact, throughout this entire slide, HTML colon open brace. The background color has a value #CC. This is in the RGB format. Each are of 2 hex digits. So this is the red, this is the green, and this is the blue. All of them have been mixed in equal proportion. This actually gives us a gray colored background. The entire HTML page is to be rendered in a gray background. This is what this particular specification says. It also says that the font to be used is Arial. One could use a variety of fonts that are available. The body of the page, body colon open brace and close brace. Within this, you have a left margin of 2 EMs. It's actually 2 M's. This roughly corresponds to the width of the small m character, and when we say 2M, it means 2 small m's. From the left of the page, a margin of 2 m's is to be kept, and the text is to be presented left aligned. in the entire body. Note that the body will have the background of the HTML, because the HTML is the main tag which has for itself it has defined a gray background, and that information will spill over into the body unless the body also says that it wants its own background color. The h1 tag, again there is a colon over here, the h1 tag says that the size of the font is to be increased 150%. This means that the header level 1 will be presented by the user's browser using a font size that is 150% more than what is the default size of the browser. Moreover, it says that the font style is bold. So the browser will present the user a bold, bigger font for heading level 1 only. You can go on specifying the details of every tag in your CSS system. The HTML marker tags are shown. The attributes, names of the attributes are shown using red arrows, and the values are shown using green arrows. How do we include this information in the web page? We are going to show two different styles. One is by using the style tag in your HTML page. Within the style and /style, the entire CSS, that the style sheet specification, is put in over here. You just type it in there. This is called as inlining the styles. The style specification, how to present the information, is made a part of the HTML page itself. This is called inlining. The other approach is to save the style specifications into a file. In this case, we are saying that file has been saved into a file called as demo-css.css, and in the HTML page we give a link, a reference to that particular file. This allows us to separate the presentation information in a separate file and the markup information in a separate file, and they are linked together using the link tag in HTML. This is interesting because you can now have multiple style sheets linked into the same page. The styles can be from different sites too, because they simply use the specification of the style sheet simply uses a href attribute, and the style specifications will cascade. Recall what we said. Whenever the body is rendered, the attributes of the higher level tag cascade information into that particular tag too. If we have a sequence of style sheets, then the information from each style will aggregate together until the final sheet is finished. In other words, the specification of how to present from file 1 will cascade into the presentation information in file 2, which is following that. That is why the name is Cascading Style Sheets, or CSS for short. This is again a good point to pause and review the material. We have also given some links to further information. The W3, of course, is the most authoritative site which contains information about CSS standards. Again, there are a number of tutorials available on the internet. W3 Schools is one of them. We also suggest have a look at sites like the CSS Zen Garden, which demonstrates the power of CSS. They will show you the same web page, same HTML markup rendered using different style sheets, and you can observe how the same markup can be rendered differently by using different style sheets, and the changes are dramatic. Having looked at how HTML and CSS work together, let us finish the final part of the puzzle. How will our program create such a thing? Here is our fair share application, the usual interactive one that generates output in HTML. If you recall, the major computation part, the model part of the story, was actually done by this method doSetup. Let's revisit that. But before we revisit, observe that after the computations are done, our Java program has been instructed to assemble the entire HTML page. Let's recall doSetup. The doSetup fellow is quite interesting. It reads the standard input for the various commands. Here is a boolean, assemble HTML. This will be true if the incoming mode of the command is end. Otherwise, it is false. This means that a web page will not be created until the user gives the end command in the entire transcript of commands. Only after the end command is received will the web page be generated. As usual, our command line program will perform the various tasks of registration, recording expenses, computing the reports, computing the fair share, and then reporting. All of that will be done as usual. Having finished all the registration, expenses, and reporting functions, let's assume that the user has given the end command, which means that assemble HTML would be true. So at the end, when our program receives the end command, it will start assembling the HTML page. How does it do? It is just a sequence of methods which assembles the HTML header, the registration information, the expenses information, the report information. It shows the database, and finally does the trailing part, the tail part of the HTML. Let us see how the header is assembled. The idea is fairly simple. It starts with a variable output messages, which starts off as null, empty. Then the entire web page that we want to produce, the markups are actually included in the string, and using the plus equals operator, they are concatenated to the previous value of output messages. So right now it was null, so this string is added, then this string gets added. Note that this \n is something that we add. Because of this \n, the new line, our HTML page appears as if handwritten. But when this page that we have apparently handwritten goes to the browser, these new lines have no meaning. The browser will only respond to BR tags. Also note that because our HTML itself requires double quotes, these double quotes must be escaped to avoid misinterpretation with these double quotes. If you observe, what we are really doing is simply writing the entire web page ourselves, but from within Java. And the functions that we write are going to assemble the header part and just start up the body part. We have introduced this div to divide our HTML into sections, and the sections will be named using the class attribute. In this case, this section is named as welcome block. By welcome block, we mean the heading and the brief information that is displayed that makes our user comfortable. It informs the user of what exactly is this application about. After you mark the start of the welcome block, you have the H1 title as usual. You have some message for welcoming the user and giving information about it. And yes, the BR tag, very necessary. And the enclosing /div tag. This /div and this div together mark the region of the HTML that we want to treat as a block called welcome block. Once all of the output has been collected into output messages, at this point we simply print it out. And then we print out a HTML header and comment. What we are really doing when we say that the Java program creates an HTML page is simply writing down the page using Java constructs. That is all. If you look at the do registration HTML part of the story, again it is the same thing. You start with a output messages as empty and go on assembling the registration information into this string variable. When I say assembling, it means the new information is concatenated to the previous information. That is why we have a plus equals operation here. Again, we are using the div tag with a class named as regblock to demarcate the region of HTML that we want to treat as a registrations block. We will use this treatment, the part of the HTML as a registration block or welcome block or whatever block, in the corresponding style sheet. As can be seen, the entire code is simply about writing the HTML page using Java constructs for string manipulation. It is this that gives us a web page as a result when the server responds with a web page. This is how the web page gets generated. We had already seen this before. This is a good time now to pause the video and review the material again. That brings us to the end of this session. Thank you. See you in the next session.